Have you ever walked into a room, maybe the kitchen, maybe your office, and, the second you get there, you just completely blank? Like, why did I even come in here? It's that maddening feeling, so universal.
Oh, definitely. And it's not just that. For you, the learner, think about spending hours prepping for something important, like a presentation, maybe an exam. You feel totally ready, and then poof, your mind just goes blank right when you need that info the most. It's incredibly frustrating.
Right. And we often think of memory as this, fixed thing, don't we? You either have a good memory or you don't. But the sources we looked at today, they paint a really different picture, a much more optimistic one, actually. Memory is adaptable. It's trainable. It's plastic. It responds to what we do.
And that's exactly what we're diving into today. We've pulled together 10 really powerful habits. These aren't just vague suggestions. They're backed by some solid science, neurological, cognitive studies. The aim here is to give you the foundational knowledge, the why behind these habits, so you can start boosting your recall, keep your mind sharp long term, and maybe, just maybe, spend less time standing in doorways wondering what you were doing.
Yeah. Hopefully. So this is a deep dive, and we've got a clear plan. We've grouped these 10 habits into 3 main areas. First, the biological foundations, what your brain physically needs. Second, the cognitive strategies, the actual techniques for learning better. And third, the context, emotional, environmental factors that help things stick.
Right. And understanding that biological machinery first is, well, it's paramount. If the hardware isn't running right, none of the fancy techniques are going to help much. So let's unpack that. Let's get straight into what the brain fundamentally needs. And the absolute non-negotiable: sleep.
Okay, sleep. When we talk memory, this feels like the right place to start because it's often the very first thing people sacrifice, right? When they're trying to cram more learning, more work into the day, sleep goes out the window.
Exactly. And the core insight from, all the research is that sleep is radically misunderstood. It's not passive rest. It's this active, very demanding, kind of 2-part neurological process. See, during the day, your brain accumulates mental waste, temporary connections. Sleep is cleanup time, organization time.
Okay, 2 functions.
Yeah.
Let's break those down. Cleanup first. What does that actually mean?
Okay, so that involves something called the glymphatic system. Think of it like the brain's internal plumbing or waste disposal system. During deep sleep, cerebrospinal fluid, it washes through the brain tissue much more effectively, way more than when you're awake. And this process literally clears out metabolic waste. Things like beta amyloid proteins, those harmful proteins linked to cognitive issues later on.
Wow, okay.
So if you skip sleep, you're essentially leaving the garbage piled up in the brain's hallways.
That definitely changes how you think about pulling an all-nighter, doesn't it? You're not just tired, you're actively stopping essential maintenance. Okay, what about the second part, the organizing function? How does sleep help us remember things from the day before?
Right, that primarily happens during what's called slow wave sleep, or SWS. Deep sleep. This is when the brain gets busy with synaptic pruning and consolidation. So during the day, you make tons of new temporary connections. Some are useful, many are just noise. SWS strengthens the important ones, the facts, the skills, the insights you actually need to keep. And it prunes away the weak, unnecessary stuff. It links the new information to what you already know, integrating it, making it permanent.
So if you cut your sleep short, say you only get 5 hours instead of 8.
You stop that consolidation process midstream. You haven't properly filed away the information. It's still stuck in the short-term inbox, basically.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and the research is really consistent here. Sacrificing that recommended 7 to 9 hours for extra study, it just doesn't work. It's counterproductive. You're actively undermining your ability to lock in the very information you just spent hours trying to learn. You get much better recall, better focus when you actually hit those sleep targets, because the brain had time to clean up and file everything properly thanks to the glymphatic system and SWS.
Okay, so we need to let the brain file things away properly with sleep. Now, let's talk fuel. Memory isn't just technique, it's also about, the actual raw materials, what we use to build brain cells, connections.
Exactly. We're talking about optimizing the hardware itself and the quality of the food you eat. It directly impacts how healthy and efficient your neurons are. The key things our sources really emphasize are specific nutrients. They act as building blocks and also like protective shields for the brain.
Okay, building blocks. What are we talking about specifically?
Primarily, omega-3 fatty acids, specifically one called DHA. You find it abundantly in fatty fish like salmon, also in walnuts. The membranes around your brain cells, they're mostly made of fat, and DHA is absolutely crucial for keeping those membranes fluid and functioning well. If the membrane gets stiff or damaged, the communication between cells, the speed and clarity of your thoughts, it really suffers.
Got it. So healthy fats help the signals travel faster, more efficiently, like greasing the pathways. What about the protective shield part?
That's where antioxidants come into play. See, just thinking, processing information, it generates these byproducts called free radicals, oxidative stress. And that stress can damage neurons over time, speeding up cognitive decline. Antioxidants, like the ones packed in dark berries, blueberries are always mentioned about, and dark leafy greens like spinach, they actively neutralize those damaging free radicals.
So it's like putting a protective coating on your brain cells against wear and tear, against aging.
Exactly. And we shouldn't forget certain vitamins too, like B vitamins. They're essential for energy production within the neurons themselves. So a balanced diet, it doesn't just make your body feel good, it's directly fueling the actual nerve cells in your brain. And when those cells are well-fed, well-protected, the communication between them gets really efficient. That leads directly to clearer thinking, quicker recall, better mental stamina.
All right, we fueled the engine with good stuff. Now, how do we get that fuel circulating and actually maybe build a better engine? Exercise, we know it increases blood flow, oxygen, all that. But you mentioned there's something more, right? Something happening at a molecular level when we move?
Yes. The general benefits, like better circulation, they're great, definitely. But the really crucial mechanism driving memory improvement through exercise is the release of BDNF. BDNF, it stands for brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And honestly, this is non-negotiable if you're serious about enhancing memory.
BDNF, I think I called it fertilizer for the brain earlier, which sounds a bit simplistic. Let's get technical. What is BDNF actually doing in there?
Okay, so BDNF is a protein. Its job is twofold. It helps existing neurons survive, and it actively encourages the growth and differentiation of new neurons and synapses. It's absolutely fundamental to neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change and adapt. And even more critically, BDNF plays a direct role in something called long-term potentiation, or LTP.
LTP, that's the big one for memory formation, isn't it? The gold standard.
Absolutely. LTP is essentially the persistent strengthening of connections of synapses based on recent patterns of activity. It's the molecular mechanism that makes a memory stick, makes it last. BDNF basically helps turn on the machinery that drives LTP. It makes it easier for those new connections to form and become stable. So when you exercise, you're sending a signal to your brain saying, hey, we need more infrastructure here. Strengthen the current pathways.
Huh. But that brings up a question then. Does the type of exercise matter for getting the most BDNF? Is just like a gentle walk as good as going for a hard run?
That's a great question. And the research offers some interesting insights. While any movement is definitely better than being sedentary, that 20-minute walk is often cited as a fantastic starting point. Good for mood, too. Some studies suggest that high-intensity interval training, HIIT, those short bursts of really intense activity, might be particularly effective at maximizing BDNF release.
Yeah.
Steady cardio is great for circulation, but HII seems to trigger this sort of acute physiological stress that signals the brain, adapt, grow, now.
Wow. So you're literally encouraging the brain to build new structures and supercharge the connections just by getting your heart rate up, even intermittently.
That really elevates movement from just good for you to a critical habit for maintenance and expansion. Okay, the last foundational pillar, and it's one that's so basic, we often forget it when we're chasing complex techniques. Water. I mean, we're trying to optimize this machine. Our brain, that's what, roughly 75% water. Exactly. And this is where super simple habits can give you almost immediate results. Because of that high water content, even mild dehydration, we're talking losing just 1% or 2% of your body fluid, has instant, measurable negative effects on your cognition.
Yeah, you feel foggy, maybe a headache. But what's the specific impact on memory? What's the mechanism?
Well, two main things happen. First, dehydration actually decreases your overall blood volume. And since the brain needs a constant, steady flow of oxygen and glucose delivered by the blood, any drop in volume means less efficient delivery. The brain really doesn't like sudden resource drops.
Okay, less fuel getting there.
Right. Second, water itself is essential for the effective transport of neurotransmitters. Those are the chemical messengers carrying signals across the synapses, carrying information.
So not only is the delivery truck blood running slower, but the packages, neurotransmitters, aren't moving as smoothly either.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah, when hydration is low, neurotransmission gets sluggish. The brain struggles to maintain focus, to execute complex thoughts, and that directly impacts your ability to encode new memories, because encoding requires sustained attention. So the practical takeaway is almost embarrassingly simple. Just keep a water bottle handy, sip consistently. It's not just a minor health tip,
It's a prerequisite for peak cognitive function. You're optimizing the very medium where all brain activity happens.
All right, we've covered the foundations: sleep, diet, exercise, hydration. The hardware is fueled, protected, maybe even upgraded with new connections thanks to BDNF. Now we need to shift focus to the software, right? The active strategies we can use to really push information into long-term memory and make sure we can retrieve it later. And the first strategy really has to tackle the elephant in the room for learners: cramming, mass practice. We've all done it, pulling an all-nighter before a test. But we also all know the information vanishes pretty quickly afterwards.
The problem isn't lack of effort when you cram. It's usually a massive effort. The problem is the timing. Cramming just tries to brute force a huge amount of information into short-term working memory. But it doesn't give the brain those crucial cooldown periods it needs to actually consolidate that data to move it into long-term storage. You're just flooding the system.
Okay, so the effective alternative is spaced repetition. We know the basic idea: review stuff over time. But why does spacing work so much better than cramming? Let's go deeper than just review periodically.
Right. So spaced repetition means reviewing information at gradually increasing intervals, maybe 20 minutes after you first learn it, then the next day, then maybe 3 days later, then a week, and so on. The reason this is so powerful comes down to a concept called retrieval practice. It's about forcing your brain to pull out the information, ideally with a little bit of effort.
Okay, explain that difference. Retrieval during cramming versus retrieval during spaced repetition.
When you cram, the information is super fresh. It's right there in your working memory. So when you retrieve it, it feels easy. Your brain basically thinks, okay, got it, easy peasy. No need to work hard storing this. The retrieval is effortless, which means the neural pathway doesn't really get strengthened much. But with spaced repetition, you deliberately wait. You come back to the material just as you're starting to forget it. That little bit of forgetting is key. Forcing yourself to recall it then, with some effort, triggers something called the testing effect.
The testing effect.
Yeah.
That's the idea that the act of trying to remember something actually makes the memory stronger.
Exactly. That little struggle, that moment of, what was it again?
Oh, yeah.
Whew, that sends a really strong signal to your brain. It says, hey, this information is important. I almost lost it. Better strengthen this connection. Each successful, slightly effortful retrieval reinforces that neural pathway far more effectively than just passively rereading or cramming ever could. Over time, that pathway becomes so robust, so efficient, that recalling the information becomes truly effortless and lasts. You're not just remembering the answer, you're practicing and strengthening the process of retrieval itself.
Okay, spaced repetition helps lock things in. Another point that came up strongly in the sources is that the brain seems to, well, hate being bored. It loves novelty. We tend to fall into routines, which are efficient, sure, but maybe that efficiency is actually the enemy when it comes to keeping our brains sharp and growing.
That's a great way to put it. Routine is like maintenance mode for the brain. Growth mode requires activating new neural circuits, different pathways. When you challenge your brain with something genuinely new, something unfamiliar, you stimulate the formation of new neural connections. And crucially, you also engage the brain's dopamine reward system.
Oh, interesting. Dopamine. How does the pleasure chemical connect to memory?
Well, dopamine isn't just about pleasure. It's a critical neuromodulator for things like attention and learning. When something is novel or unexpected, the brain releases a little burst of dopamine. This acts like a sort of highlighter, tagging that experience or piece of information. It marks it as salient, high priority, something worth remembering. This enhances the encoding process, making the memory stickier, more vivid.
So it's like mental cross-training. If I only ever do, say, Sudoku puzzles, I'll get really good at Sudoku, but my overall cognitive fitness might not improve much beyond that specific skill.
Precisely. If you only repeat activities you're already good at, you're just using those well-worn, efficient pathways over and over. But to build new capacity, new resilience, you need genuine novelty. You need to push the boundaries. The studies consistently point towards activities that demand high cognitive load, maybe complex problem solving or integrating new motor skills. Things like learning a new language, picking up a musical instrument, or even taking up a complex game like chess or bridge. These tasks force your brain out of its comfort zone, stimulate those new connections, and increase your overall mental sharpness and adaptability. It's like building more roads on your mental map.
Okay, so challenge is good. Now, let's talk about tricks. Ways to make abstract information less abstract. Mnemonics. These are tools to transform dry facts, things the brain struggles to hold on to, into something more vivid, maybe visual, even emotional.
Exactly. Mnemonics, things like acronyms, rhymes,
little visual stories. They're incredibly powerful cognitive hooks. They work because they leverage systems the brain is already naturally brilliant at, things like spatial memory, processing emotions, handling visual information. They essentially let you translate abstract data from your fragile working memory into a more stable, often visual, long-term structure.
The classic example everyone knows is for the planets, right? My very educated mother, etc. But for this deep dive, let's maybe explore a more sophisticated technique and why it works. What about the method of Loche, the memory palace?
The memory palace. It's a fantastic example because it taps directly into our highly evolved spatial memory. Our brains are, from an evolutionary perspective, incredibly good navigators. We needed to remember where the food was, where the dangers were. The method of loci harnesses this. You associate abstract items, a shopping list, key points of a speech, historical dates with specific, sequential locations within a very familiar environment, like walking through your childhood home in your mind or your daily commute route. You place each item at a distinct location. Then, to recall the information, you just take a mental stroll through your palace and see the items where you left them.
That makes so much sense. You're basically piggybacking the new abstract data onto an ancient, robust system spatial awareness. Genius.
Yeah.
What about visualization techniques that maybe don't rely on a specific place, just making mental images?
Right, and that's where the power of absurdity and emotion really comes in. Many advanced mnemonic techniques rely on what some call the PAV principle: picture, action, vitality. The idea is that the mental images you create need to be exaggerated, dynamic, maybe funny, maybe even a bit shocking or bizarre. If you just try to remember the word lamp by picturing a normal lamp, it's boring, it won't stick. But if you vividly imagine that lamp wearing sunglasses, breakdancing on your desk while singing opera, well, that's different. That bizarre, active, maybe slightly ridiculous image creates an emotional connection. It triggers that novelty response, maybe even a little dopamine. It makes the memory far more distinct and easier to retrieve.
So facts alone are slippery, but facts woven into a weird, dynamic, multi-sensory story, they become almost unforgettable. You're essentially recruiting the powerful visual and emotional processing parts of the brain to help out the more logical, factual parts. Okay, we've optimized the biological machine, we've installed some clever cognitive software. Now we need to look at the environment, both internal and external, the emotional state, the social context. These things can either supercharge our memory efforts or completely sabotage them.
Yes, and this point loops right back to biology in a really critical way. Chronic stress, the kind that just grinds on day after day, isn't just unpleasant, it's a genuine chemical assault on your memory system. And it specifically targets the hippocampus. That's the brain region absolutely essential for consolidating information, moving it from short-term recall to long-term storage.
And the main chemical culprit here is the stress hormone, cortisol, right? What exactly does too much cortisol over too long a period do to that memory factory, the hippocampus?
Well, when cortisol levels are constantly high, it starts this kind of corrosive process. Specifically, research shows that sustained high cortisol can lead to the shrinking and retraction of dendritic spines within the hippocampus. Now, the dendritic spines, they're these tiny little protrusions on neurons that receive incoming signals from other neurons. They're crucial for forming new synaptic connections, for learning.
Whoa. So chronic stress isn't just making it hard to focus in the moment. It's physically damaging the brain's ability to receive and integrate new information. The receiving antennae are actually shrinking.
That's the essence of it. Yes, it weakens connectivity. It leads to that feeling of memory fog, difficulty retrieving things you know are in there somewhere. However, and this is important, we need a bit of nuance here. Research makes a distinction between that damaging chronic stress and short bursts of acute stress.
Ah, that's a good point. Because sometimes that little bit of anxiety right before a deadline or stepping on stage, it can actually feel like it sharpens your focus, right?
It can, absolutely. Acute short-term stress can temporarily boost attention and alertness. It kind of primes the brain for immediate action. Adrenaline kicks in, focus narrows, but that heightened state isn't sustainable. When the stressor doesn't go away, when the cortisol tap stays open indefinitely, that's when it becomes chronic. And the damaging effects on the hippocampus start to outweigh any temporary benefits. The memory factory effectively starts shutting down production because of that ongoing chemical attack.
Okay, so managing chronic stress isn't just about feeling better. It's a direct way to protect the physical structure needed for memory. It becomes an essential memory habit itself. And the sources mention some simple, actionable ways to lower that cortisol load, right?
Yes, thankfully. Simple techniques that activate the rest and digest system, the parasympathetic nervous system. Things like deep, slow breathing exercises, even just for a minute or two.
mindful meditation breaks, or that 20-minute walk we talked about earlier, especially in nature. These actions intentionally lower cortisol levels. By doing them regularly, you're actively shielding your hippocampus, allowing it to do its job of consolidating memories without being constantly under chemical siege.
All right, this next one often surprises people, I think. We tend to see learning and memory as solitary activities, head down, focused. But the research suggests that our brains actually treat social interaction as a really potent cognitive booster, a requirement almost.
It really does seem that way, and the likely reason is evolutionary. Our brains evolved in highly social contexts. We're wired to prioritize information that has social or emotional relevance. Think about it. You hear a piece of really juicy gossip, or a dramatic story about someone you know.
You remember every detail.
Exactly, because of the emotional weight, the social context. Conversation, storytelling with others, even just laughing together, these things create emotional connections with the information being shared.
It's the difference between, say, reading a dry historical fact in a textbook versus hearing a captivating story about that same event from a passionate history buff friend. The social interaction adds depth, resonance, and importantly, that emotional tag you mentioned, which makes it easier to find later.
Precisely. That emotional tag acts like a powerful retrieval cue. Your brain doesn't just store memories in one place, it uses networks. Adding an emotional or social layer creates more potential pathways back to that memory. But you raised a really good point earlier, host speaker, about personality types.
Yeah, like if I'm naturally introverted, is forcing myself into a loud party really going to boost my memory more than, say, spending that time in quiet, focused study?
That's where quality definitely trumps quantity. The goal isn't to force everyone to be an extrovert. It's about engaging in meaningful, active social interaction. So for someone more introverted, maybe one deep, stimulating conversation with a colleague about a complex topic you're both interested in is far more beneficial cognitively than attending a huge, noisy party full of superficial chat. What the research strongly confirms is the negative side. Loneliness and isolation are actively harmful. They're linked to weaker memory function, and some studies even show associations with decreases in actual brain volume over time. So the key is meaningful engagement, whatever that looks like for you, one-on-one, small group, whatever feels stimulating and connecting. That's the cognitive medicine.
Okay, we're at our 10th and final habit. This one feels like it closes the loop, ensuring that everything we took in during the day actually gets properly banked. It's the habit of daily review, of reflection, making sure those new, still fragile memory traces get locked down before sleep takes over.
Yes, this is the crucial, intentional final step for really ensuring long-term retention. At the end of the day, you need to actively, effortfully retrieve and review what you learned or experienced. If you just let the day fade into the next without doing this, those temporary connections you formed start to degrade almost immediately. Active consolidation means deliberately pulling that information back up, mentally or physically.
And the sources suggested a couple of really simple but powerful ways to do this daily consolidation, right?
They did. The first one is simply writing things down. This could be jotting down a few bullet points of key takeaways from a meeting or a reading, or maybe writing a short journal entry summarizing what you learned that day, even just rephrasing notes into your own words. The physical act of writing forces retrieval, it forces organization, and that process itself is a massive reinforcement for the memory.
Okay, writing it down. And the second technique involved using your voice.
Yep. Exactly. Summarizing the information out loud. You could do this just talking to yourself, or perhaps explaining what you learned to a partner, a friend, even your pet. The key is that speaking forces your brain to engage in free recall. That's mentally much harder, much more demanding than simple recognition like, say, picking an answer on a multiple choice test. When you have to summarize something in your own words out loud, you're actively reconstructing the knowledge, finding the connections. This dual approach, either writing or speaking, that physical or verbal reinforcement, really helps cement those neural pathways. It ensures the memory stays sharp and accessible not just overnight, but over the long haul. It's the vital bridge from encoding to lasting retention.
Wow. Okay, we have covered a lot of ground today. A really profound range of habits. We started with those foundational biological needs, sleep, thinking about the glymphatic system, diet, getting those omega-3s and antioxidants, exercise, boosting BDNF, and simple hydration. Then we moved into the active cognitive strategies, using spaced learning and retrieval practice instead of cramming, challenging the brain with novelty, and using clever mnemonics like the memory palace or vivid visualization. And finally, we looked at that crucial emotional and environmental context, managing stress to protect the hippocampus, using socialization as that emotional glue, and ending the day with active review and reflection.
And if you pull all of that together, if you synthesize all these findings, the core message is actually incredibly empowering, especially for you, the learner. Boosting your memory, building that capacity, it's not really about hoping you inherited some kind of magical photographic memory gene. It's fundamentally about intentionally engineering your daily habits, structuring your life to optimize all these biological and cognitive processes that underpin learning and recall. You have to choose to prioritize sleep, to eat well, to move your body in ways that generate LTP, to consistently challenge your mind to manage stress.
Right, and the real beauty of it seems to be that the power doesn't come from trying to make one gigantic, probably unsustainable change overnight. It comes from the small, consistent actions, adding these habits, stacking them day after day.
Indeed, that's the key, because these small daily actions, they compound over weeks, months, years. They build on each other, leading to a significantly sharper, more powerful, more resilient memory capacity over time. And when you think about that long-term compounding effect, not just remembering things better tomorrow, but potentially delaying or even preventing cognitive decline decades from now, it really reframes how important these seemingly small habits are.
Absolutely. So that leads us to our final provocative thought for you, the learner. We've talked about 10 really powerful habits today, and honestly, trying to implement all 10 at once might feel overwhelming. But given that small, intentional actions compound, what is just one memory habit from our discussion today? Maybe it's committing to that 20-minute walk, maybe it's just taking 5 minutes to reflect or jot down notes before bed. What's one thing you could realistically start today? Something that could begin compounding over the next week, the next month, the next year. Start small, be intentional about it, and start building that memory palace, brick by daily brick.
Keep learning, keep challenging yourself, and keep that amazing brain sharp. We'll catch you next time for another deep dive.